Go. While we wait for everyone else to come on in, I'm going to begin by saying hello and welcome back. We are so excited to kick off season 3 of Digging In. I'm Lindsay Randall, the host of the speaker series. Digging In is a series of live presentations with scholars from around the country, co-sponsored by the RS Peabody Institute of Archaeology and the Massachusetts Archaeological Society. We are going to begin today with a land acknowledgement for the land that the Peabody Institute and Phillips Academy are on. Phillips Academy occupies the land of the Pennacook and Pawtucket peoples and the lands of the contemporary Abenaki, Massachusetts, Wampanoag, Wabanaki, Pokanoket, and Nipmuc nations. We honor all Indigenous people who are here now, have been here for time immemorial, and will have been here in the future. We acknowledge Indigenous genocide and the continued oppression of Native peoples, voices, cultures, and spiritualities. We understand how education has been used by settler institutions in the attempted erasure of Indigenous peoples. We commit to interrogating the histories of and our complicity in colonization, centering Native voices and communities, and dismantling the ongoing legacies of settler colonialism at Phillips Academy and beyond. So join us every other Wednesday at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time through December for our presentations. For a schedule of dates and presenters, please visit us at thepeabody.andover.edu or at the Massachusetts Archaeological Society's Facebook page. And if you enjoy our programming, consider expanding your impact by becoming a member of the Massachusetts Archaeological Society. We are able to bring you outstanding programming through support of viewers like you. Today, we are excited to welcome Caroline Gardiner. Caroline received her BA in Archaeology and Anthropology from the University of Virginia and Master's in Historical Archaeology from the University of Massachusetts, Boston. She has worked at several sites, including Monticello, Mount Vernon, Plymouth, and Jamestown, and she analyzed the first home site for her 2017 master's thesis and is a consultant for the Alden House Historic Site. So welcome, Caroline.
Thank you. Very happy to be here.
Okay. So anytime you want to start screen sharing or anything.
See if we can get the technology working here.
I know. Like over a year in and Zoom sometimes still.
All right. Can everybody see that? Hopefully. Yes. Okay. We are good. All right, I will get started then. First of all, thank you to the Peabody Institute and to the Massachusetts Archaeological Society and to the Alden House Historic Site. I was lucky enough to work with this site for my master's thesis, like you said, in 2017. And today I'm very excited to share some of those findings with you. So I'll start with a little history of the family, the Alden family. John Alden signed on as the Mayflower's Cooper. He was also a signer of the Mayflower Compact, and he went on to hold many positions in the early colonial government. Priscilla, née Mullins, sailed on the ship with her parents and her brother, and also a family servant. Yet tragically, she lost them all within that first harsh year at Plymouth. She and John eventually married. They would have 11 children, and then they would become cultural icons in the 19th century when one of their very famous descendants, and they do have many, including presidents and poets and actors, but Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was one of them, and he published his poem, The Courtship of Miles Standish, which tells a fictional love triangle between John, Priscilla, and Captain Miles Standish. John and Priscilla originally lived on Fort Hill, which is now Burial Hill in downtown Plymouth, where the UMass Boston Fisk Center has recently uncovered the Fort Palisade and a 17th century house, which is very exciting. Following the land distributions in 1627, the Aldens moved about 10 miles north to modern Duxbury. The archaeological remains of their first home are now called the first site. And you can see that in the top picture there. The family's second home, which they moved into around the end of the 1600s, that still stands and as a museum, and it draws many, many visitors a year, including, luckily, Alden descendants. And both sites are now designated as National Historic Landmarks. So to move towards the archaeology, Roland Robbins excavated the first site in 1960. He found its stone foundations, and that includes the stone line cellar, and thousands of both Native American and 17th century European artifacts. Several archaeological analyses followed, and you can see how the collection has kind of moved through the bases here, went through storage, and then many people after that. The most recent studies were done by myself and my fellow UMass graduates, Grace Bellow and Elizabeth Taroulis. So my study was a reanalysis of the ceramic collection, specifically its composition and spatial distribution across the site. So this study posed three main research questions. First, what was the composition of the collection in terms of wear type, vessel forms, vessel functions? The ceramics are, as we know, very specific, so you can use them as a proxy for studying household activities. So that gives us a clue of what the Aldens were doing in their day-to-day lives. The second question was, are there spatial patterns in where these sherds of these broken ceramics are found across the site? That might connect to telling us where the Aldens were in fact performing those daily activities. And third, how did the Aldens' daily practices, again, including those daily activities and their use of their household spaces, compare with those of their contemporaries? The first step was to create a ceramic catalog, identifying wear type, glaze, vessel form, and vessel function for each sherd where possible. And there were over 1,000 sherds total, so it took a little bit, but it was definitely worth it. Not surprisingly, the collection was dominated by coarse earthenware, a full 98% of the collection, particularly the ubiquitous redware. It was just everywhere. This is notably similar to other early Plymouth colony sites and shows the colonists' reliance on inexpensive and utilitarian vessels. The rim sherds shown, there were also 20 Native American sherds in the collection. Most were low fired, and unfortunately just not enough remain to identify the vessel forms at this time. However, the rim sherd shown here, that's the bottom picture, is the only highly fired and decorated piece. And you can see the cord markings on both the body part and the rim. These sherds may show that the Aldens settled on land previously occupied by Native Americans, which was a common practice at that time. Or even interactions between the two groups, especially since one of John's many posts within the colonial government was serving as a land agent. Because so few sherds were identifiable, I went on to focus on the European vessels, but hopefully somebody else will come along in a few years, or maybe less than that if we're very lucky, and be able to identify them even further. There were other surprises within the collection, and I also wanted to highlight actually one of my favorite sherds. You can see it in the top picture. This sherd had 2 fingerprints, so presumably of the potters, impressed on the outer rim there. And it's artifacts like these that just give me shivers. They're the best connection to the past. So moving on, and you'll see a lot of ceramic pieces in here. While identifying wear types, potential vessel forms were also noted. This relied mainly on the Potts typological system, the Potomac typological system, Also comparative collections, that's 17th century New England sites, and also the British Museum, Victoria and Albert, these kinds of things. Those were very, very useful. And also MNV analyses, the minimum number of vessel analyses. 12 specific vessel forms were identified. These ranged from candlesticks to storage jars to milk pans. And you can see one of those huge milk pan brims in the bottom image here. Interestingly, both individual cups and mugs were found alongside communal vessels like Bartman jugs and pitchers. The identifiable forms were then divided into categories based upon functional use. So like I said, ceramics are very specific forms and made for very specific reasons. So together, these sherds represent a variety of daily activities. You can see in the chart here, there's beverage consumption with those cups and mugs and pitchers that I mentioned. We had cooking, we had a lot of dairying. There's all kinds of different activities going on in this household. I will note that beverage consumption and dairying especially took up a large portion of identifiable sherds. In the 17th century, women such as Priscilla and her daughters were the ones doing the dairying tasks. I will also note the large number of Iberian storage jar sherds, or jar sherds just in this count. These were all Iberian storage jars, as you can see in the picture. And previous mendings showed that 26 of these sherds fit together into just one jug. So that really was a bias in the mathematical results that we had to take into account. So together, these findings just of the wear type analyses showed that the Aldens relied on vessels ranging from England, Germany, the Netherlands, Spain, and perhaps even China. You can see 3 sherds of a Chinese porcelain cup in the bottom image there. However, the majority were utilitarian wares, like that redware, those pitchers, dairying, things like that, used in traditional English subsistence farming lifestyles. Several household activities were indicated, including cooking, dairying, storage. Like I mentioned, there was a huge storage cellar, so that wasn't surprising. However, what was surprising was those costly items. There were very, very few, but they are just spectacular sherds. Costly sherds of a brightly painted tin glazed charger are in the top image there, and the Chinese porcelain wine cup. Now, together, these might have been used for display, so you can put the cup on a shelf, or you can put a charger up, standing up on a wall, and rather than for serving, so not exactly eating off of these. And these sherds could indicate personal preference, how the Aldens decorated their homes, and also how they demonstrated their personal status to visitors. So then moving on here, there was a whole second part of this study. After the wear type analysis was that second research question to ask, okay, these are the activities that the Aldens are doing. Let's ask where in the household they were performing them, or can we tell at all? That in itself is an answer. So to answer this was, the method was to input the sherd provenience data, so where those sherds are found across the household, into a digital mapping software, ArcGIS, and use the statistical analyses to analyze how the sherds were distributed across the site. These distributions could be the result of 3 processes, basically random fill or site disturbance. Just this is a many hundreds of year old site, things just get mixed around and there's nothing left. That's one option. The house could have fallen in on itself. So, things like window glass would have been found, with architectural nails, and maybe the ceramics got mixed up in that. Or if we were very lucky, there would be surviving activity areas, i.e. where the Aldens were actually using vessels and breaking them, and then the sherds would just get deposited and not disturbed. Analyses were run on various areas of the site, but I'll focus today on the interior units of the household. So that's inside of that stone foundation that you saw earlier. I applied a variety of statistical tests to analyze how sherds were distributed within these units. I'm not a statistician, I will make that disclaimer, but ArcGIS does a great job. They have built-in stat tests, and then it just spits out a map that you can just look at and analyze. So not to get too bogged down in the numbers here, but basically what the program does is compare the sherd distributions that you put into it, i.e. the real where sherds were found on the site, and compares those to a truly random distribution that the computer generates. So what you can tell from that is whether the sherds are too close or too far apart from each other to be truly random, or if there are higher or lower sherd counts in certain areas than you would expect, again, from that random sequence. So surprisingly and very excitingly, the test revealed 3 patterns, and you can see them in the maps on this slide here. Just moving down top to bottom, there was a linear pattern of predominantly redware sherds along the northern edge of the home. It was very, very linear. So that was an immediate sign that something else was going on here other than a random distribution. Second, all other wear types, and for this purpose, I deem them non-redwares. It's just easier for comparative purposes. They clustered in the south central units of the household. So you can see the bright red units right there. Just like those temperature maps that you see on the Weather Channel, you know, higher red means a lot of sherds, and then the blue there means that there weren't as many as you would expect, or the cooler areas, if you will. And then third, all sherds, so that's redware and all other wear types, seem to cluster in the home center. So while the wear type and form analysis that I discussed a little bit earlier showed the types of tasks the Aldens did each day, I could then dive deeper into each of these 3 spatial patterns to understand exactly in the home they might have been performing the tasks. So that's what I'm going to do now. Just run through each of these really, really quickly and hopefully connect them back to the wear type analyses. So this is the first pattern, that linear pattern all across the top of the site. Many different wear types. However, there were predominantly redware sherds. Like I said, it was just everywhere across the site. These cheap utilitarian vessels were easily made, used very, very often for a variety of tasks, and therefore easily broken. So their distribution, this linear distribution, likely represents multiple depositional events over time, i.e. the Aldens were using vessels over and over and over again, and they were just breaking them. They would get a new one, break it again, make a new one. The linear pattern indicated that maybe this was a sweeping event. So the Aldens would maybe break a vessel and sweep the sherds up against that back wall. There was also, interestingly, a cluster of glass in those top very, very dark red corners. So that indicated, yes, again, a breaking event. Maybe the Aldens, like I said, were sweeping up against the back door into back corners, but also potentially out a central back door. So the second cluster contains several types of wares and vessel forms. Again, this was less redware, more the other wear types of the collection. So M&V counts, again, those minimum number of vessel counts, identified several individual vessels. And you can see that an example here of those Tingley sherds in the bottom there, there are at least 3 distinct vessels there. So the blue one, the green one, the blue and white or striped, and then the purple and striped one. So M&V counts like this definitely identified those individual vessels that had been used and deposited in that same area. The central cluster was therefore interpreted as an intact activity area, keeping the interpretation rather broad for the moment, where multiple vessels were used, broken, and like I said, just deposited in situ. Notably, however, Robbins identified a possible hearth in this area, which you can see outlined in black on that map. So that would match with both the lid and pan fragments found nearby and the idea that this was a multifunctional space. Related to that was the final pattern, that broad pattern in the middle of the home foundation, again with several different types of vessels and household activities being represented. However, comparatively, the eastern third of the house, so the right side on that map there, contained relatively few sherds. And based upon comparisons with other contemporaneous house plans, it is thought that the first home therefore might have had a tripartite layout. So going through on that map there again, the western side on your left hand had a room and a cellar. Then the central multi-purpose hall or kitchen, again with Robbins's possible hearth, where vessels were used and deposited for used for a variety of tasks and deposited. And then on the eastern side, that might have been an area where less activities were performed, used for storage and or sleeping. So unfortunately, going back to the cellar, while we don't know exactly what type of room was over that area at this time, the high number of nails found within the cellar area suggests that it was once covered with a wooden floor rather than an earthen one. So at least we have some idea of what the interior of the house looked like. So let's expand that even further. On the architectural side of things, the house foundation, the first home foundations are surprisingly small and very narrow. It's just a stone foundation, a simple rectangle, measuring only 10.5 by 38 feet. And keep in mind the large family size, it was John, Priscilla, and up to 11 children. They might have not all been living in the house at the same time, but still that is a lot of people in that small area. However, when gradation maps, the ones that you see here below, of ceramics plus nails and window glass distributions were made over the site as a whole, they indicated a possible southern extension to the known foundation. So in these maps, the foundation that we know of today is outlined in black. And then you can see the sherd distributions. There's a very strong pattern, especially to the south of the home. This corroborates other scholars' hypotheses that there is perhaps more to the Alden household that we know of today. And that will hopefully lead to future studies of potential post holes that would indicate a post and ground extension to the home. So finally, looking again broadly, the final part was to compare the Alden first home site to contemporary sites. So this study included the Allerton Prince Cushman site and the 2016 Plymouth excavations at Burial Hill, the area around which John and Priscilla first lived. The three assemblages contain similar wear types and vessel forms. Vessel forms, they included both English and foreign wares. So that's other countries in Europe, as I mentioned, that maybe China with the Chinese porcelain wine cup. All of the collections were dominated by those utilitarian redware sherds. One of the few differences, however, was the higher number of slipware and stoneware sherds at the Allerton site. So these more expensive vessels may demonstrate Allerton's occupation as a trader, his higher personal status and wealth, or because trade to the colonies increased over time, they had more access to more amounts of goods, a later site occupation period. However, the first home site also demonstrates the subsistence farming lifestyle that these homes shared and with other sites in New England in the 17th century. The Aldens' daily activities included dairying, again seen with those milk pans especially, food and beverage preparation and consumption, and storage. These mundane actions are what allowed the Aldens and other families to establish themselves within their new surroundings. And the final trend was the first home site's architectural elements. These findings indicated that the Aldens, like their contemporaries, utilized storage cellars, designated one room as multi-purpose, so that hall or the kitchen, as you also seemed it deemed, and reserved another for storage and or sleeping. So therefore, while the specific house styles themselves varied, the organization of internal spaces definitely remains similar. And again, further studies, these open up more questions, but they'll hopefully continue to investigate how individual households varied within these wider trends. Where's my, oh no, there we go. Overall then, the ceramic collection alone provides many details of about what life was like at the Alden first home that were unknown until this point. It speaks to the family's resource access and their daily activities, as well as what their home might have looked like and how they organized its spaces. By grounding the mythology surrounding the Aldens in their everyday material realities, we can start to know them not as those romanticized, mythologized figures, but real and living individuals. So again, just thank you all very much.
Well, thank you. That was awesome. So if anyone has questions, you can either use the chat function or the Q&A, but I'm going to get some questions going. So how did you get connected to the Alden collection and the Alden site?
Sure. I was at UMass Boston, and David Landon, who is now one of the leaders of the Plymouth excavations with Dr. Krista Baranek. I was lucky enough to have them both on my panel. But he came up to me one day, he's like, we have a site and it needs to be reanalyzed. It's been looked at a couple of years ago. It's 17th century, connected to Plymouth. Are you interested? And I said, yes, absolutely. I want to see what this holds. And I went on, it was a great connection to the excavations that we were doing that summer. So I basically got lucky.
That's awesome. I have to say, if people watching don't know this, my master's thesis was on one of the Mayflower sites too, the Allerton site. So I'm jealous by you being able to do spatial analysis and knowing where your artifacts came from. So I should take that Dietz did not get his hands on these and mess them up with his dot dash coding, right?
No, it wasn't Dietz. However, there were other challenges with this collection. There was no vertical provenience recorded. All we had was kind of that chessboard of this is found in square one, this is found in square two. Do with that what you will. It was kind of we had something, and we definitely were able to find spatial patterns, luckily. But again, that vertical provenience, is this older than this, and where does it go in the chronology of the site? We were not able to find that. But maybe future excavations, like I said, those post holes, maybe we'll find more information.
Thank you. Now we have another question from Sarah. She's hearing you, as you talk about it, that all the sherds were found on what would have been the floor, and with the sweeping patterns, there's higher concentration of sherds to indicate that they were sweeping them out. But they were okay with so much trash being there. So are the pilgrims slobs? Or what should we take away with this?
Right. So I wouldn't say that they were slobs. practices back then were a bit different. There was no trash pickup on Thursdays, you know. So you kind of have to make your own space. And the earth, when you think about it, when you're sweeping things into those back corners out the back door, you are getting it out of the way. So you're not trotting on glass sherds, you're not trotting on broken china or redwares or whatever's. It's in the back where you don't see it so much. It's in those corners. And then the earthen floor, actually, you know, if you trot an earthen floor, it gets pretty packed. You can get things buried in there, and the earth just kind of covers it up with that trampling, and it's like there's nothing. You can't get hurt by it really, and you're not seeing it. It's not an eyesore. Again, there might be middens in that yard area that we don't know of. They might have just not had a scatter. They might have had it, you know, sweep it out the back door and then into a designated area. We just don't know that at this time. But definitely it wasn't like they were just living in a pigsty. They were definitely getting it out of the used area of the home.
Okay, we have another question from Luann. Does documentation show if anyone lived in the house after the Aldens moved to their second house?
So the thought right now is that the Aldens, it gets a little tricky. We don't really know. Dendrochronology has dated the second home to around the turn of that century. So we're thinking maybe John and Priscilla actually died, and their son Jonathan inherited the property, and the family moved to that second home. Maybe John and Priscilla lived in that second home for a few years, and the other site was just left to either fall in on itself or its materials be used to build that second home. So basically, that's a long-winded way of saying the family, I really don't like the word abandoned, but they moved to that second home. The first home was not lived anymore, and it was used for either materials to build that second home, or like I said, it just fell in on itself over time.
So they're not renting it out or anything?
No, they're not renting it out.
Got another question for Marion. Can you explain what a charger is?
Sure. So think of a big platter, essentially. There's a couple of recreated pieces in the Plymouth Patuxent museums. If you just Google chargers, you'll see examples. Like I said, in those British museums, especially, it's big plate, big decorated plate. So these were, you could use them for serving. Plymouth, the last time I was there, they actually had it hanging up on a wall, or you set it up on a shelf. You all saw how intricate that design was. So it was used commonly as a decoration piece instead of an actual serving platter.
Things aren't that different. I actually have a couple plates up on my wall, right? You know,
Yeah.
To be very pretty. Continuing on, we have, unless anyone else has any other questions, we have one last question about the collections. Do any other Mayflower family contemporary collections also have Chinese porcelain, or are they unique in that?
That I don't know. I know that there are expensive pieces, like I said, those stonewares and those slipwares in the Allerton site. Things like that would have been expensive and hard to find, unless you were a trader or, you know, inherited it from somewhere. I don't know. I know that there should be, there are other porcelain examples from 17th century sites, but I don't know of any specifically. But this is not, you know, 1 in a million find. There are others. They're just rare given their price and their value.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you for coming to talk with us today, and thank you to our viewers for joining us. And we look forward to seeing everyone at our next lecture, which is Wednesday, August 25th, when we are joined by Rachel Meyer, who will be speaking about the restoration of the Howard Street Cemetery, an African-American burial ground in Salem, Massachusetts. And again, we rely on supporters of viewers like you. So consider supporting our outreach by becoming a member of the Massachusetts Archaeological Society. So have a great afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you, Caroline.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.